My name is Caroline Harland, and I'm 57 years old. My father disowned me at 57, told me I wasn't worth a dime. But what he didn't know is that my late mother had already left me half of everything he owned. And the day I sent him the legal notice naming me the sole beneficiary, his empire began to crumble. If you ask most people in my town who my father is, they'd probably describe him as a visionary, a real estate mogul who turned abandoned land into million-dollar neighborhoods. But if you asked me, I'd tell you he's a man who can make you feel small with just one look. For as long as I can remember, I've been trying to earn his approval, and failing miserably every single time. My father, Victor Harland, doesn't believe in love. Not really. He believes in leverage, in control, in the power that comes from being the one who holds the purse strings. Growing up, I learned quickly that affection in our house had a price tag. When I was a little girl, I'd bring him drawings or straight A report cards, and he'd just glance up and say, "That's fine, but what are you going to do with it?" As if love was a transaction, and I never had enough to bargain with. He used to say I was too soft, too sentimental, and not business-minded enough to survive in his world. Those words didn't just sting. They sank in. They built invisible walls inside me, ones that kept me second-guessing every decision I ever made. While other girls dreamed about growing up and being seen by the world, I only dreamed of being seen by him. When my mother, Elaine, passed away 5 years ago, I thought maybe that wall between us would finally crumble. I thought grief might soften him, maybe even open his eyes to how much I'd always tried. But grief didn't change him. It hardened him even more. At her funeral, as I stood next to him by the casket, I watched him barely shed a tear. His eyes weren't mourning her. They were calculating the next move in his empire without her. After the service, I approached him, hoping to share memories, or maybe just a moment of vulnerability. Instead, he looked at me coldly and said, "You always were too much like her. Emotional, weak. That's why neither of you could ever run a business." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, holding the last rose I'd meant to lay on her grave. That moment replayed in my head constantly. I tried to move on. I poured myself into my work, counseling women who'd escaped abusive relationships, helping them rebuild their confidence, their lives. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered to me. And yet, every time I achieved something meaningful, I could still hear his voice in the back of my mind saying, "That's not success. My younger brother E never had that problem. He was everything Dad wanted, ambitious, loud, selfish, and most importantly, while I was away getting my degree in psychology, Ethan was already learning how to manipulate markets and people. Dad took him under his wing early, showing him the ropes of the family business. The two of them spoke their own language, one of numbers, contracts, and power plays, a language I was never invited to learn. By the time I was in my 40s, I'd quietly accepted that I'd never inherit much from my family, not that I wanted to live off their money. But what I hadn't accepted was the constant reminder that I didn't deserve it. And that reminder came again, sharper than ever, one cold December evening during a family dinner. It was supposed to be a rare night of civility. Ethan had brought his wife. The house was decorated for Christmas, and my father was in a relatively good mood. Until, of course, the topic of inheritance came up. Ethan, half joking, asked Dad whether he was finally updating his will. Dad chuckled, swirling his brandy. "I've already taken care of that," he said. Then, with that familiar smirk, he turned to me. "But don't worry, Caroline. You don't have to concern yourself with these matters. You wouldn't know what to do with a trust fund anyway." The room went silent. Ethan laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the tension, but I couldn't even breathe. My face burned. I wanted to disappear right there at that mahogany table. I muttered something about needing to leave early and excuse myself, barely making it to my car before the tears started. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, feeling that familiar mixture of rage and sadness churn inside me. No matter how old I got, he always found a way to make me feel like a useless child. I cried for almost an hour before driving home through the fog. That night, I told myself that I'd had enough, that I would never again let his words define me. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I'd spent too many years trying to prove myself to a man who had already decided I was unworthy. Days passed, and I tried to move on, throwing myself into work and routine. But just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, fate intervened. One quiet Tuesday morning, as I sorted through the mail at my kitchen counter, I noticed an envelope that made my heart stop. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Renner and Associates, addressed to me personally. But what made me freeze wasn't the firm's name. It was the handwriting across the front of the envelope, looping, elegant, and heartbreakingly familiar. It was my mother's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I held it, my pulse quickening. How could this be? She'd been gone for years. Inside that envelope, I would soon discover a secret that would not only challenge everything I thought I knew about my family, but also turn my father's cruelest words into the key to his downfall. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, the envelope lying before me like something sacred and dangerous all at once. The air felt heavy, thick with the kind of silence that only exists when something is about to change your life forever. My hands trembled as I reached for a small knife to slit the seal. The stationery inside was cream-colored, edged in gold, the same kind my mother always used when she wrote me notes growing up. I recognized it instantly. She used to keep stacks of it in her desk drawer beside a jar of lavender ink. The moment I saw her handwriting, my throat closed up. "My darling Caroline," it began in her delicate cursive. I traced the first words with my finger, tears already stinging my eyes. It was dated 3 months before she passed away. I had no idea she'd written anything for me after her diagnosis. She'd told us she was focused on treatment, on getting better, never once hinting that she was quietly preparing something this important. Her letter was long, written in that careful, deliberate tone she always had when she was trying to protect someone. "If you're reading this," she wrote, "it means the truth must finally come to light. You have spent your life trying to please your father, and I have spent mine trying to shield you from his cruelty. I can no longer protect you in this world, but I can leave you the means to protect yourself." I swallowed hard, my fingers shaking as I read each word. My mother, always gentle, always wise, had done something extraordinary. She went on to explain that she had quietly established her own trust, separate from my father's empire, something he never knew about. She wrote that it was her way of ensuring I would never have to depend on his approval or his money again. "You are the heart of this family," she said. "Your father built walls of wealth, but you built bridges of compassion. I could not let him erase that." Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. It was as if she could see right through the years of hurt I'd hidden from her. The letter grew even more shocking. She explained that her trust contained half of everything she jointly owned with my father: real estate properties, investments, and company shares. Half, she had written clearly, underlined twice, and then, the most astonishing line of all, "You are the sole beneficiary." I read that part again and again, barely able to breathe. My mother had left everything, to me. But then I saw the next sentence, one that made my stomach twist. There was a condition. The trust would only activate after my father's death. She had made sure that nothing could trigger Victor's wrath while she was alive, and even after her death, she'd wanted to prevent him from retaliating while he still had power. I could almost hear her voice explaining it, calm and practical. But as I continued reading, my pulse quickened again. She had added an exception. "If your father commits an act of coercion, financial manipulation, or emotional abuse toward you," she wrote, "the trust may be activated earlier through legal channels. In that event, contact my attorney, Ms. Gloria Renner, who will guide you through the process." I read that paragraph at least 5 times, my mind spinning. My father's words from the dinner table echoed in my ears. "You don't deserve a trust fund. You wouldn't know what to do with it." Those cruel, dismissive words, and his attempt to cut me off from everything, might actually meet that condition. Could it be possible that his own arrogance had finally handed me the key to something he never wanted me to have? I stared at the letter until the words blurred. The smell of old paper mixed with faint traces of my mother's favorite perfume, gardenia. It felt like she was there with me, whispering that I wasn't powerless anymore. At the bottom of the letter was a printed contact, Ms. Gloria Renner, attorney at law, with a phone number and office address downtown. My mother's handwriting followed beneath it. "She knows everything. She will know what to do. Trust her." For several minutes I sat motionless, staring at that line. My mother had always been a planner, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She had foreseen the possibility of my father turning against me, and had set up a way to protect me from him even after she was gone. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight as I sat there, absorbing every detail. I felt equal parts grief and fury, love and disbelief. My mind replayed every cruel remark my father had ever thrown at me, every time he'd told me I was nothing without his name. And now here I was, holding proof that my mother had seen me differently, as someone worthy of more than scraps of affection. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced through every possible scenario, every fear. What if the trust was gone? What if my father had somehow discovered and dismantled it years ago? But the lawyer's name gave me hope, a small, solid thread I could hold on to. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, my thumb hovering over the number written in my mother's steady hand. My pulse raced as I finally pressed call. It rang twice before a composed voice answered. Renner and Associates, this is Gloria. My voice wavered slightly. Hi, my name is Caroline Harland. I received a letter from my mother. She mentioned you. There was a pause, not of confusion, but of recognition. Then Gloria's voice softened. Caroline, she said, as if she'd known me all along. We've been expecting your call. My heart skipped a beat. Expecting my call? I repeated. Yes, she said firmly. And there's something your father doesn't know. Something your mother made sure of. Her tone was calm, but her words sent a shiver through me. Whatever this was, my mother had prepared it long before she died. And my father, he had no idea the storm that was about to come for him. The next morning, I drove downtown to meet Ms. Gloria Renner. Her office was in one of those restored heritage buildings, all brick, brass, and quiet authority. When I stepped inside, I was immediately struck by the space. It wasn't the cold, intimidating kind of law office I expected. The sunlight streamed through wide windows, glinting off shelves filled with neatly arranged law books. Framed photos lined the walls, family gatherings, college graduations, and what looked like a picture of Gloria shaking hands with my mother. She greeted me at the door herself. Caroline, she said warmly, extending her hand. You look just like her. Her tone disarmed me. It wasn't the polite professionalism of a lawyer. It was genuine affection. She led me into her office, where a folder sat neatly on her desk, secured with a red ribbon. Your mother was meticulous, Gloria said, easing into her chair. She didn't trust your father's ethics, and from what I've heard, she was right not to. I nodded, unsure what to say. My father's name carried weight in this city. Even people who respected him feared him. I'd spent a lifetime living under that shadow. Gloria untied the ribbon and opened the folder. What I'm about to show you, she said, is a trust unlike anything I've seen in my career. Inside were legal documents, some typed, some bearing my mother's flowing handwriting in the margins. Elaine designed multiple protections into this, Gloria continued. Your father cannot legally interfere, no matter how much power or money he throws around. I leaned forward. What kind of protections? She flipped through the pages until she stopped at one marked Clause 17b, Early Activation Provision. Gloria read aloud, in the event that Victor Harland, by word or action, publicly or privately disowns or expresses an intent to deprive my daughter, Caroline Harland, of inheritance or familial rights, said trust shall be transferred immediately into Caroline Harland's sole possession. I blinked, barely comprehending. Wait, I said slowly. You mean, if he says I don't deserve the trust? Gloria met my eyes. Yes, those exact words, or anything to that effect, would trigger the clause. Your mother built in that safeguard because she knew how he used language as a weapon. She predicted this might happen. A strange, almost dizzying sensation washed over me. The memory of that dinner replayed in my mind with painful clarity, my father's cold smirk, the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes when he said, You don't deserve a trust fund. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. He said it, I whispered. He literally said those words. Gloria leaned back in her chair, a knowing look in her eyes. Then, Caroline, by your mother's design, you have every right to claim this trust now. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, but my mind was torn in two. One part of me wanted to celebrate, to finally seize what I'd been denied my whole life. The other part, the daughter still yearning for her father's approval, hesitated. I don't know if I can do this, I murmured. He's still my father. Gloria's expression softened. I understand, but let me ask you this. When was the last time he acted like one? The question hit me harder than I expected. My mind flooded with memories. The times he mocked my career, dismissed my kindness as weakness, told me that empathy was for people too poor to matter. I remembered the tears, the silence, the endless striving to prove myself to a man who'd already made up his mind. You're right, I said quietly. He's never treated me like his daughter. Just another liability. Gloria nodded. Then this isn't about revenge. It's about claiming what was already meant for you, what your mother intended to protect. I looked down at the documents again. The pages seemed to hum with power. Not the kind my father craved, but something more profound. This was my mother's love made tangible, written into law. What do I need to do? I asked. Gloria pulled out a notepad. We'll need documentation, she explained. Proof that he made the statement and that his behavior qualifies as emotional or financial coercion. Did anyone else hear him? Yes, I said after a moment. My brother Ethan was there. He laughed when Dad said it. That's good, Gloria replied. We'll need his testimony, or at least acknowledgement. We can also use any written communication or recorded conversations as supporting evidence. I hesitated. Ethan won't help me. He's too loyal to Dad, or too scared of losing his cut. Gloria gave a small, wry smile. Then we'll find another way. There's always a paper trail with men like Victor Harland, and believe me, your mother anticipated every trick he might try. As she organized the documents back into the folder, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet, determined strength that had been buried under years of doubt. This will get messy, Gloria warned gently. Once we file for activation, your father will know immediately. He'll fight it. I know, I said. My voice was steady, surprising even myself. But I'm done being afraid of him. Gloria studied me for a long moment, then smiled. Then you're ready. Once we begin this process, there's no turning back. Are you sure this is what you want? I met her gaze. Yes, I said. Let's move forward. She extended her hand. Then, Caroline, let's make sure your mother's last wish is honored. As I left her office that afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall windows and spilled across the marble floor. For the first time in years, I felt light, like I was walking out from under a shadow that had followed me all my life. But that sense of peace didn't last long. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the skyline, my phone buzzed. It was my father. His name glared at me from the screen. I hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, his voice was calm, unnervingly calm. Caroline, he said, almost gently, we need to talk about something important. When my father called me that evening, his voice had a strange calmness to it, the kind that only ever meant one thing: manipulation. He sounded gentle, almost apologetic, asking if I'd join him for dinner at the mansion, the same mansion where, for decades, I'd been belittled, at that grand oak dining table while the chandeliers sparkled above me like silent witnesses. I've been thinking about you lately, he said over the phone. Maybe I was too harsh the last time we spoke. Too harsh. That was his version of remorse. I wanted to hang up, to tell him I had nothing left to say. But part of me was curious. He never reached out unless he wanted something. And if Gloria was right, if he already sensed the legal ground shifting beneath him, this invitation wasn't kindness. It was strategy. When I arrived the next evening, the mansion looked exactly as it always had, polished, cold, and soulless. My mother's touch, her soft colors, her flowers, her warmth, had long been erased. The moment I stepped into the dining room, I saw Ethan standing behind Dad's chair, looking as smug as ever. Caroline, Dad said with that performative smile, the one he reserved for public events and photo ops. You look well. Sit down, please. Let's have a civilized meal for once. I sat opposite him, my pulse thudding in my ears. Ethan poured the wine, his smirk practically daring me to question why I'd been invited. Dad started with small talk, the weather, my counseling work, even a strained joke about the economy. I just nodded, keeping my tone neutral. Then, as the main course was cleared, he leaned forward, fingers steepled like a man about to deliver a verdict. You know, Caroline, he began smoothly. Families fight. We say things we don't mean. Maybe I've been too focused on business all these years, and not enough on unity. I almost laughed. Unity was not in his vocabulary, but I stayed quiet, letting him spin whatever illusion he was weaving. I don't want bad blood between us, he continued. Your mother wouldn't have wanted that. Hearing him invoke her name made my stomach twist. He never spoke of her unless it served a purpose. I glanced at Ethan, who gave a quick nod, clearly in on whatever this performance was. Good, I said finally. Then maybe we can just start fresh. He smiled faintly. Exactly what I was thinking. Then he reached into his briefcase, which had been sitting on the sideboard the whole time. I've had my lawyers draft something. Just a simple formality to ensure transparency moving forward. He slid a folder toward me. The moment I saw the legal letterhead, my gut told me something was wrong. It's a waiver, he explained casually. It just clarifies that you have no current claims or interest in the Harland estate or associated holdings. It'll make things cleaner legally. Protect both of us. I froze. He said it so lightly, so effortlessly, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. Why would I need to sign something like this? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. It's just paperwork, he said smoothly. You wouldn't believe the kind of vultures that circle family wealth these days. You're not losing anything. It's just a precaution. A precaution, right. My mother's words from her letter echoed in my head. If he commits an act of coercion, financial manipulation, or emotional abuse, this wasn't a peace offering. It was a trap. I picked up the papers, scanning the dense paragraphs. Legal jargon filled the pages, but one line jumped out at me. The undersigned, Caroline Harland, hereby waives any and all rights to assets, trusts, or inheritance derived from Victor Harland or associated family entities. He was trying to erase me, again. I'll need time to think, I said, folding the papers neatly. I don't sign anything without reviewing it first. He gave a polite, almost fatherly nod, but his eyes flickered with irritation. Of course, he said. Take your time. I trust you'll make the right decision. As I stood to leave, Ethan stepped closer. Don't overthink it, Caroline, he murmured under his breath. Dad's just trying to protect what's his. I met his gaze coldly. You mean yours too, don't you? He smirked, saying nothing. The drive home felt endless. My fingers itched to call Gloria, but I forced myself to wait until I was inside, behind locked doors. The moment I did, I scanned the documents and sent them to her with a short message. He wants me to sign this. Says it's a formality. It didn't take long for her to reply. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Her response was blunt, almost urgent. Do not sign. This proves intent to defraud you. Keep the original copies. We can use this as evidence. I stared at her words, my heart racing. My father's change of heart had been nothing but a calculated move to trick me into giving up the very thing my mother had fought to protect. I sat on the couch for a long time after that, clutching the papers, realizing the truth. My father didn't just want control. He wanted elimination. He couldn't stand the idea of me holding anything that wasn't under his thumb. It was nearly midnight when another email from Gloria arrived. This one had a single attachment, a scanned legal document stamped with the court's seal. The subject line read, Elaine Harland Trust. Early. Activation notice. I clicked it open, my pulse quickening as I scrolled through the pages, and there it was, my mother's signature, written in her familiar, graceful hand. According to this document, if my father ever attempted to manipulate me into relinquishing my rights, the trust would automatically activate upon submission of evidence. In other words, the very act of trying to cheat me had triggered the one thing he'd spent his life guarding against. I sat back, stunned. The power dynamic had just shifted, and for the first time, it wasn't in his favor. The next morning, I was back in Gloria's office. The trust documents spread out across her polished oak desk. The city buzzed faintly through the window behind her, but inside, the air felt still, like the moment before a verdict is read. I had barely slept. My father's waiver was still fresh in my mind, his manipulative tone looping through my head like a curse. Gloria sat across from me, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Caroline, she began, her voice calm but firm, your father made a serious mistake. By attempting to coerce you into signing away your rights, he triggered the exact condition your mother planned for. She pushed a folder toward me, its tab labeled in neat print. Petition for early activation. Elaine Harland Trust. This, she said, tapping it lightly, is your key. Once we file this with the evidence of his statement and the waiver attempt, the court can activate the trust immediately. I swallowed hard, my palms slick with nerves. So, this means everything transfers to me now? While he's still alive? She nodded. Yes. Half of all jointly held assets, property, investments, shares, everything your mother owned is now yours. Once approved, Victor loses control over that portion entirely. I stared at the document, the weight of it almost physical. He's going to explode, I said softly. Gloria gave a faint smile. That's likely, but you're not doing anything wrong. You're simply executing your legal right. Your mother was very clear about this. You're not taking what's his. You're taking what was always meant to be yours. I exhaled shakily and picked up the pen. My signature felt heavy, deliberate, as if each stroke was severing another invisible chain that had bound me for decades. When I finished, Gloria stood and offered her hand. Congratulations, Caroline. You're about to reclaim what's rightfully yours. Her words echoed in my chest like a promise. Within days, the petition was filed, and within 2 weeks, after a short review process and a hearing that my father didn't even bother attending, the court officially approved the activation. Just like that, I was the sole legal beneficiary of half of the Harland holdings. It didn't feel real at first. I wasn't used to winning, not against him. I half expected someone to call and tell me there had been a mistake, that my father had found some loophole to undo it. But this time, the law was on my side. The news spread quickly through the local business community. The Harland name had always attracted attention, and gossip traveled fast in circles of power. Everyone knew Victor had been grooming Ethan to take over everything. Suddenly, the narrative changed. Whispers began. Victor's daughter just inherited half the empire, the forgotten one, the one he disowned. The first time I saw his name trending in local financial headlines, Victor Harland faces family trust dispute. I didn't feel pride or triumph, just relief. It was as if the world had finally seen behind the curtain of perfection he'd spent decades maintaining. Ethan, however, wasn't taking it so gracefully. He called once, his voice sharp with panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. "You're ruining Dad's legacy. The board is freaking out. Investors are threatening to pull out." I stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe they should ask why Dad thought cutting me out entirely was a good idea." "You don't understand," he snapped. "You've just started a war." "Then maybe it's time someone did," I replied, and hung up. For a while, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible. I returned to my work, spent time with the women I counseled, and tried to ignore the calls that kept lighting up my phone. But my father was relentless. He alternated between rage and pity, between threats and pleas. "Caroline," one voicemail began, his tone soft and trembling. "We can fix this. You don't have to listen to that lawyer. She's using you." Another came hours later, cold and venomous. "You think this makes you powerful? You're nothing without my name." I stopped listening after that. But then one morning, a man in a tailored gray suit appeared at my front door. He handed me a large envelope, sealed with the emblem of my father's law firm. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Inside, printed in dense legal language, was a notice of civil action. My father was suing me. The listed claims were outrageous: mental incompetence, manipulation by third parties, coercion, and breach of family trust. It was as if he'd rewritten history, painting me as the unstable one who'd been tricked into this by outsiders. I sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the papers in disbelief. He was really willing to drag me through court to undo what my mother had built. For a man obsessed with image, it was a desperate, ugly move. I called Gloria immediately. She answered on the first ring, already sounding unsurprised. "He's doing exactly what I expected," she said calmly. "This is his attempt to intimidate you into backing down." I let out a bitter laugh. "He doesn't know me anymore, does he?" "No," she said, "but we'll remind him." As we discussed next steps, my gaze fell on the framed photo of my mother I kept by the window. Her gentle smile steadied me. She had known this day would come. She'd prepared for it. And I suddenly remembered something Gloria had mentioned weeks ago, that there was still one sealed document in the trust file marked, "Open only if contested." My pulse quickened. "Gloria," I said slowly, "you mentioned once that there was something else." "A final document?" She was quiet for a beat. "Yes. Your mother left one more card to play. I think it's time you saw it." I knew exactly what I had to do next, and it wasn't to back down. It was time to show him the final card my mother had left for me. The next morning, Gloria called me to her office again. Her tone was calm, but purposeful, the kind of voice she used when something important was about to unfold. "Caroline," she said over the phone, "there's one more document we haven't discussed yet. I think it's time you saw it." My stomach tightened as I drove to her office. The city outside seemed louder that day. The rush of traffic, the hum of people moving quickly, but inside the car, everything felt muffled. I had thought the surprises were over, that I'd seen every last thing my mother could have possibly prepared. I was wrong. When I arrived, Gloria met me at the door. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She simply gestured toward her desk. Sitting in the center of it was a small sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges and stamped with a red wax seal. In my mother's looping handwriting were the words, "Open only in case of dispute." Gloria looked at me over her glasses. "Your mother left this in my care," she said. "She told me that if your father ever tried to contest the trust, I was to open it, but only in your presence." I felt a lump rise in my throat. My mother's foresight never ceased to amaze me. Even in death, she had found a way to stay 2 steps ahead of my father. I nodded. "Let's open it." Gloria carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. A flash drive was taped to the paper, along with a short note written in my mother's elegant cursive. "If Victor or anyone contests this trust, please play this recording in court. The truth must be known." My hands trembled as Gloria inserted the flash drive into the computer. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, my mother, sitting in her garden, sunlight spilling through the hydrangeas behind her, the soft hum of birds in the distance. She looked radiant, peaceful, and heartbreakingly alive. "Hello, my darling," she began, her smile tender. "If you're seeing this, it means your father is fighting what was never his to begin with." I couldn't breathe. Her voice, that calm, steady voice that used to read me bedtime stories, filled the room. "I want to be very clear about something," her eyes sharp now, purposeful. "The assets in this trust were acquired through my own investments, my own ventures, but a portion of them, nearly half, were originally hidden under my name to help Victor avoid tax liabilities." I gasped. Gloria leaned forward, eyes widening slightly. My mother went on. "He believed that by placing them in my name, he could protect his empire from audits and scrutiny. He was wrong. I documented everything, every transfer, every transaction. If he ever tries to challenge this trust, those records will surface. And if the IRS reviews them, they will have questions." A knowing smile crossed her face. "You see, Caroline, your father's greed was always his weakness. I simply ensured that his weakness would protect you." Tears blurred my vision. She had not only built a safety net for me, she had built a trap for him, a moral and legal snare hidden in plain sight. The video continued, her tone softening. "I know this will be difficult for you. You have always been the gentle one, the forgiving one, but this time you must be strong. Don't let guilt weaken your resolve. You are not taking what is his, you are preserving what is yours." She paused, her expression growing tender again. "If you're standing in a courtroom when this is played, don't look at him for validation. Look inside yourself. You've always had the strength to stand on your own. I only wish I could be there to see it." The screen faded to black, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt sacred. Gloria sat back slowly. "Your mother," she said quietly, "was an incredible woman." I nodded, unable to speak. My eyes were still fixed on the dark screen. In that moment, I realized just how deeply she had understood him. His pride, his obsession with control, his absolute belief that he could outsmart everyone. She had turned his arrogance into a weapon, one that would defend me long after she was gone. Gloria stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll hold this recording until the hearing," she said. "When your father's lawyers start their theatrics, we'll play it. It'll be the end of his case, and possibly the end of his reputation." I exhaled slowly. "Do you think it will destroy him?" Gloria's expression was measured. "It will expose him. What happens after that will be up to him." For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my father. The years of intimidation, the constant need to prove myself, it all fell away. My mother had given me something far more powerful than money, the truth. That night, I replayed her voice in my head over and over. Calm, confident, loving. I could almost smell the faint scent of her garden, hear the rustle of the wind through her favorite hydrangeas. She had thought of everything. Even in death, she was still guiding me. When the day of the court hearing finally arrived, I woke before dawn. I dressed carefully, choosing the simple navy dress my mother had given me years ago. My hands were steady as I slipped the flash drive into my purse. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. The Harland name was big news now, and they were hungry for a family scandal. But I didn't care about the whispers or the cameras. Gloria met me at the steps, her expression composed but fierce. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I am." We walked inside together, the echo of our footsteps filling the marble corridor. And there he was, my father, standing tall, surrounded by his lawyers and advisors. He was confident, even smirking, as if the outcome was already guaranteed in his favor. He didn't even glance at me as I passed. But that was fine, because he had no idea what was coming. The courthouse was overflowing by the time I arrived. Reporters packed the steps outside, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Curious locals clustered near the entrance, murmuring in excitement. The Harland name had always drawn attention, but never like this. Everyone wanted to see the powerful Victor Harland, the man who'd built an empire on intimidation, finally face something he couldn't control. Inside, the air was thick with tension and expensive cologne. My father sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by his attorneys, his posture as rigid as a marble statue. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable, but I could see the tightness around his jaw, the telltale sign that he was barely holding his composure. Ethan sat behind him, feigning support. His face was a perfect mask of concern, but his eyes flickered toward me every few seconds, filled with accusation. He'd always been my father's mirror, his echo, his loyal soldier. I could see the same blend of arrogance and fear written all over him. Gloria leaned toward me. "Remember, Caroline," she whispered, "we're not just defending your rights. We're revealing the truth. Stay calm. Let the evidence speak." The judge entered, an older man with sharp eyes and a tone that demanded respect. He called the case to order. My father's lead attorney, a man named Richard Cole, rose first. His confidence radiated across the room like static electricity. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about money. It's about manipulation. My client's late wife, Elaine Harland, established a trust under questionable guidance. Since her passing, their daughter, Mrs. Caroline Harland, has been influenced by outside parties, notably Ms. Gloria Renner, to seize control of assets that are rightfully part of the Harland estate." He paused dramatically, turning to look at me as though expecting me to shrink under his gaze. "We intend to show that Mrs. Harland is not acting of sound mind, but under undue influence and emotional distress." I could almost hear the rustle of reporters scribbling notes. My hands tightened in my lap, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't that frightened girl anymore. When he finished, the judge nodded toward Gloria. "Ms. Renner, your response?" Gloria rose gracefully, smoothing her navy suit. Her voice, when she spoke, was measured and calm, every syllable a scalpel. "Your Honor, the evidence will show quite the opposite. Mrs. Caroline Harland acted fully within her legal rights, as dictated by the trust established by her late mother. Furthermore," she said, placing a hand on the folder before her, "we have in our possession a notarized video statement from Elaine Harland herself. It details the origins of the assets in question, and the true intent behind the trust." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Even the judge's brows lifted slightly. Gloria continued, "We would like to submit this video as Exhibit A." Cole immediately stood. "Objection, Your Honor. We have no verification that this so-called video is authentic or relevant." Gloria didn't miss a beat. "It's notarized and time-stamped, and it directly addresses Mr. Harland's intent to conceal assets under his wife's name. I assure you, it's relevant." The judge leaned forward. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Ms. Renner." Gloria pressed a key on her laptop. The lights dimmed slightly as the video filled the courtroom monitor. My mother appeared on the screen, seated in her garden, sunlight flickering across her soft features. A hush fell over the room. Even my father, for all his composure, leaned forward slightly. "Hello," she began, her tone steady and warm. "If this message is being played, it means Victor has challenged my trust, something I always feared he might do." Gasps rippled through the audience. My heart hammered in my chest. She went on, describing in meticulous detail how she had built her portion of the estate and how Victor had used her name to conceal millions in assets from taxation. "If he chooses to contest this," she said, her gaze steady, "then he invites scrutiny from the IRS. And I assure you, the documentation exists to prove every word." My father's face drained of color. He muttered something to his lawyer, who immediately rose again. "Your Honor, this—" "Sit down, Mr. Cole," the judge interrupted sharply. "You'll have your turn." My mother's voice continued. "To my daughter, Caroline. This trust is not vengeance, it's protection. Don't let guilt silence you. You deserve peace." By the time the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the speakers shutting off. The judge cleared his throat. "That testimony is legally binding," he said firmly. "It clarifies the intent of the trust and the ownership of the assets." Cole stood once more, his tone desperate now. "Your Honor, we still contend that—" "Enough," the judge cut him off. "This court finds no evidence of undue influence or incompetence. The plaintiff's case is without merit." He turned toward me. "The trust remains fully activated in Mrs. Caroline Harland's favor." For a moment, the words didn't register. It was over. The years of humiliation, the belittling, the doubt, all of it ended in a single declaration. My father slumped slightly in his seat. For the first time, he looked smaller, older, diminished. The titan of Harland real estate, undone not by his rivals, but by the wife and daughter he'd underestimated. Gloria squeezed my hand. "It's done," she whispered. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed, voices shouted, and microphones thrust toward me. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, the autumn air cool against my face. Behind me, I heard hurried footsteps. Ethan caught up, his voice low and furious. "You've just destroyed him," he hissed. "You think this is over, Caroline? You have no idea what he's planning next." I stopped and looked at him, my heart pounding, but I said nothing, because deep down I knew he was right. My father wasn't finished. Not yet. The courtroom victory should have felt like freedom, and in some ways it did. But the days that followed were heavier than I expected. The media attention was relentless. My father's name was dragged through headlines. Our family reputation dissected by people who'd never known us. Every article, every whisper carried that same undertone of shock. The perfect Harland empire, undone from the inside. Then, 3 days after the ruling, I got the call. Ethan's voice was frantic. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack. They're saying it was mild, but—" His words broke off in a shaky breath. "You should know, Caroline. This is on you." I froze, the guilt hitting like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd known there would be fallout, but not this. Not something that could end his life. I drove to the hospital in silence, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every mile between my house and that building felt like a lifetime. When I finally reached his room, Ethan was standing near the bed, arms crossed, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly. "He doesn't want to see you." But I stepped inside anyway. My father lay there, pale and motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Tubes and wires surrounded him, a man once so invincible now reduced to frailty. His eyes opened when he heard my footsteps. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his lips curled slightly, his voice hoarse but still full of that old venom. "You took everything." I stood by his bedside, meeting his gaze. "No," I said softly. "You gave nothing." He looked away, his jaw tightening. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was sorrow. Not for the man he'd been, but for the one he never allowed himself to become. Ethan muttered something under his breath and stormed out, leaving us alone. I stayed a few minutes longer, watching the heart monitor beep steadily. Somewhere deep, inside, I realized that this silence between us, was the closest thing to peace we would ever have. When I left the hospital, I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just felt empty. Over the next few weeks, word spread that my father was stepping back from everything. He sold off his remaining real estate shares and retired from public life. No press conference, no farewell statement, just disappearance. For a man who had once demanded attention at every turn, it was almost poetic, retreating into the same shadows he'd forced everyone else into. Ethan, however, didn't retreat quietly. He called me one last time, his voice filled with venom. "You happy now? You've broken this family. You think Mom would have wanted this?" I took a deep breath. "Mom wanted fairness, Ethan. She wanted peace. Maybe if Dad had listened to her, we wouldn't be here." He laughed bitterly. "You sound just like her." "That's the best thing you've ever said to me," I replied, and hung up. He hasn't spoken to me since. The months that followed were strange. I had more money than I ever imagined I'd possess, yet the house felt empty. My life, which had always been defined by surviving my father's shadow, suddenly had no shape. There were no more battles to fight, at least not with him. So I started fighting for others. I took a portion of the inheritance and created a small foundation, the Elaine Fund, dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after financial or emotional abuse. I named it after my mother because it was her courage, not my father's wealth, that built everything I now had. The first scholarship went to a young single mother studying to become a social worker. The second to a woman opening her own small business after escaping an abusive marriage. Each time I signed one of those checks, I felt something inside me mend. Every act of giving was like reclaiming a piece of the love my mother had left behind. I could almost hear her voice in the quiet moments, proud, steady, reminding me that compassion was never weakness. It was power. Over time, people's whispers faded. My name appeared in different kinds of headlines now, not scandalous, but purposeful. Elaine Fund helps local women rebuild, one paper read. I clipped that article and tucked it into a photo frame beside my mother's picture. It felt like the closure I had been waiting for my entire life. Then, 1 year after the trial, the past found me again. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where sunlight draped everything in gold. I was sipping coffee when the doorbell rang. A man in a dark suit stood on my porch, holding an envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Harland," he said. His tone was polite, professional, but something in his eyes told me he knew exactly what he was delivering. I thanked him and closed the door. The envelope bore the embossed logo of Rutherford and Crane, my father's longtime estate attorneys. My stomach twisted as I broke the seal. The subject line at the top of the letter was short and final. The last will and testament of Mr. Victor Harland. My hand shook slightly as I sat down at the kitchen table. Whatever was inside, I knew it wasn't money I cared about. It was something else. One last message, one last move in a lifelong game that was finally coming to its end. I stared at the envelope, my pulse echoing in my ears. My father was gone. And now, at last, it was time to see what he had to say. The lawyer's office was quiet, too quiet. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, the kind of sterile calm that only existed in places where lives were reduced to documents and signatures. I sat across from Mr. James Rutherford, my father's longtime estate attorney, a man I had seen countless times at family functions, always standing silently in the background, holding secrets in his briefcase. Now he was the one holding my father's final words. He adjusted his glasses and gave me a sympathetic look. "Mrs. Harlan," he said softly, "I appreciate you coming in. I know this must be complicated." That was one word for it. Complicated didn't even begin to cover the storm inside me. I nodded, my palms resting flat against my knees, grounding myself. "You said there's a letter?" He nodded and opened a folder. "Your father's will was updated shortly before his passing. He made some changes." Of course he did. Even from the grave, Victor Harland needed to have the last word. Rutherford pulled out a single-page document, folded neatly, the paper crisp and white. He slid it across the table toward me with both hands, like he was handing over something sacred. I hesitated before touching it. Part of me didn't want to know. After everything, the court battle, the humiliation, the years of being treated like an inconvenience, what could he possibly have left to say that would matter now? Still, I unfolded the paper. At the top, in formal black print, it read, "Last Will and Testament, Addendum." Below, in my father's bold handwriting, was a single sentence. "To my daughter, Caroline, you were right." That was it. No property, no instructions, no assets. Just 7 words, followed by his signature. I stared at it for a long time, my heart thudding softly in my chest. I expected anger to rise, maybe disappointment, or that old familiar ache of not being enough. But instead, something else filled me, a stillness. For the first time, I didn't feel the sting of rejection. I didn't feel empty. I felt free. He hadn't left me money, but he'd left me something he'd never given in life. Acknowledgement, admission. Those 7 words were more valuable than any check he could have written, because they meant he knew, at the end, that I had been right to stand my ground, that I had stopped the cycle of control and cruelty that defined his life. I folded the white paper carefully and slid it back across the table. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. Rutherford nodded. "That's all." He left instructions for the rest of the estate to go to various charities, anonymously. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him, always wanting control, even in generosity. The lawyer hesitated, then said gently, "He spoke of you often, you know. Not kindly at first, but the last time I met with him, he said something I didn't understand until now." I looked up. "What did he say?" He said, "She's more like Elaine than I ever realized." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The lump that had been sitting in my throat all morning finally broke loose, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I blinked them back and managed a small smile. "That's the best compliment he ever gave me," I said softly. When I left the office, the sun was low in the sky, painting the city in warm gold. I drove without thinking, without destination, until I found myself at the cemetery, the same one where my mother rested, and now just a few rows away, my father too. The air was cool and still, the late afternoon wind carrying the faint scent of rain. I stopped at a flower shop nearby and bought a simple bouquet of white roses, my mother's favorite. When I reached his grave, I placed them at the base of the stone. His name was carved in clean, elegant letters, Victor Harland, 1942 to 2025. Beneath it, the inscription read, "A builder of legacies." I stared at that phrase for a long time, my thoughts swirling. In his own way, he had built a legacy, but not the one he'd imagined. His empire might have been bricks and dollars, but my mother's and mine, ours was truth, integrity, freedom. I knelt down, brushing a speck of dust off the marble. "You taught me something," I whispered. "Not the lesson you intended, but a lesson all the same." The wind stirred the grass around me, carrying away my words. "You taught me the value of self-respect," I continued quietly, even if it took a lifetime to... A long silence followed. I didn't cry. I didn't feel bitterness or regret, just peace. A peace so deep, it felt like it had been waiting for me all these years. As the sun began to set, the light turned soft and amber, washing everything calm. I stood and looked at both headstones, my mother's, full of grace and warmth, and my father's, solid and cold. Between them, I felt the full story of my life, love, pain, and finally, balance. When I turned to leave, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, and I wasn't the timid woman who'd cried in her car after family. I was the woman my mother had believed I could become, the woman my father had finally, grudgingly, admitted existed. As I walked away, the last of the daylight faded behind, painting the horizon in gold and silver. My mother's foresight had given me justice. My father's arrogance had given me strength. Together, they had shaped the story of a daughter who refused to be forgotten. In the end, I didn't win because of money. I won because I finally learned my worth. My father's power came from control, but mine came from peace. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers that you were right all along. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone you loved, remember, your worth doesn't need their approval. And tell me this, would you forgive someone who only realized your value after it was too late?